I think that us coming out of quarantine, I'm so starkly reminded of watching people who spent significant times, like 6 or 8 months in maximum security, coming back into general population. So people who are in solitary confinement or like heavily restricted, a lot more restricted conditions, administrative segregation, where they might have very little interaction with other people, but they might still be around other people. And people who are in those conditions, they have to cut, like, it takes time for them to like come back to like being social again. And I'm just blown away by like the responses that I've had with friends and family and seeing them go through the same process. And it's just like, it's really stark. And it's just like, I'm like, oh wow, like people need time to recover and to heal and to figure out how to be social and be interactive and human again. Whereas like me, I've gone through this process a couple times. So for once, I actually have like the like mechanisms to like help me like get through this. And so like I'm already like out and about. I'm going like, 2 months ago, I was still on lockdown. Now I'm fully vaccinated. I'm going out and about. I walk around in, I walk around in comfort. I walk around, very, very, assured of, that I'm not going to, that I'm very unlikely to like get, get sick or make others sick. So, but like I can tell that there's a lot of people who are very worried, especially given the economic situation that a lot of people are in. I don't have, I'm not in a very good economic situation right now. Like sure, I'm like doing content production, but like I'm doing content production because doing other things is not as like it's not able to pay the bills as well as it was, a year ago. So, I'm now, I haven't had health insurance for a year.
Wait, what's going on? What changed? Why do you say it was easier to make money outside of content production a year ago as compared to today? What kinds of avenues were once available?
I don't think I realized how much safety I was sort of getting out of like doing university talks, for instance. I don't make a lot. I didn't think I made a lot of money like doing like going to like universities and talking to kids and like doing workshops on like activism and sort of like awareness of like the prison industrial complex and all these different things. But it is a pretty big aspect of like, one of the things that was like giving me a cushion to like, to allow me to like have some flexibility and comfort, because like, I don't have like a salary, I get paid in dribs and drabs, and I have to like get that to like, and I have to like manage that over a period of time. And, like I've had like, after I got out of jail after the grand jury stuff, because I got sapped out of money from the grand jury stuff. And because I resisted a grand jury for a year a lot of people think it's a lot of people think that it's the it was definitely associated with like the leaks. Like I was being asked questions about like the leaks in 2010. But like, it's unclear like what they were trying to do apart from like just sort of harangue me and bring stuff up again. And so like, I don't engage with grand jury. I don't engage with grand juries or feds or anything like that. So just like, I was just like, no, like I'll sit in here for however long. And I'm not, but then they started doing fines. And so I just sort of like like my financial status was sort of like shown to be like a lot more precarious than.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the argument I've heard made is, the grand jury process was they are essentially by their nature fishing expeditions. Yes. And the objective was to try to find additional dirt on Julian Assange. And so you were being used as kind of a proxy in that.
It's unclear. It's unclear based upon like the discussions that we had with the prosecution whether or not that was the actual objective, because they never said that was the they never, because and like all like I've seen the evidence in this case, so like all the evidence in that case is like I can't tell you what it is, but like it's like been laid out, like nothing. There's no evidence to changes between 2013 and today at all, and the prosecution or the U.S. Attorney's Office seems to acknowledge that. But it seemed more like retribution for the commutation by the Trump administration. It seemed much more along those lines than to be anything actually useful in terms of like the extradition case and all that other stuff. And I don't know anything about that. I all I know is what I know, and that's already been laid out like 100 times over.
How stiff were the fines and the legal fees ultimately that you had to pay for your grand jury resistance?
I got I think it was over $250,000, which there was a movement. They raised there was a GoFundMe. People raised money right before the pandemic hit, and I got the fines paid off. But the legal fees, because I had to pay for lawyers, weren't paid off. I spent that out of pocket, and that was about another 60 or 70 grand. So I took, I basically like, I went from like, hey, should I buy my first home like ever? Like, should I consider this? Should I get like a studio? Should I get like a studio place? To like, okay, like I'm broke again.
I wonder, how do you think of the commutation? Because one of the interesting things about your case is that the political valence of who will defend you and not has changed over time as, we entered the Trump era and all of the Russia fear mongering, and those who might have been, in support of you on free speech grounds are suddenly, Hillary Clinton acolytes who will blame you for Trump's win, and all of this stuff on and on and on. How do you interpret Barack Obama's decision to commute your sentence?
I interpret it very simply, and that is that, he had one opportunity to actually do something, and that something was, we actually differed quite a bit in terms of like campaigning on the commutation of pardon front, right? Because like I was like I'm in prison. I don't need a pardon. I don't need, I've gone through the process and everything else. Like for me personally, and this is not on anyone else, right? For me personally, I was just like, we're going to ask for 10 years. Like, let's just cut my sentence from 35 to 10. And that is an ask that I think we can make to the Obama administration, or to, President Obama himself personally, as like an individual, not just as like an office, and see if we can, and see if we can just be like, hey, like, look, I lost the court martial, but like we believe we asked for 10 years. We asked for a 10-year sentence during sentencing at trial, and that we asked that again, in the commutation effort on the official side. Other campaigners said time served, and we got time served, and I'm floored by that. And he did not have to do that. It was it's a legacy defining. If you think about it, it's a legacy defining risk. It's like the last thing that he did before his presidency was to completely change my life. So that was like that was a personal individual risk that he took to like change, to vastly change my life. And I have, I can't credit, you can get into all these other different things, all these other different political things. I'm just like, that took guts, and he didn't have to.
That's why it's so interesting, right? Because there has always been this narrative around Obama that I know that I engaged in as well, which was, it's really hard for him to be the first Black president. He, is under kind of unprecedented amount of scrutiny. So, okay, if he doesn't do what I would have liked him to do in his first term, in his second term, it'll be different. Okay, now we're in his second term and he still is not being the, radical that I would have liked back in 2008. So, but, he's under all these pressures. Maybe after he's no longer president. He'll be out in the streets offering his full support behind various movements, ripping the veil off of America's criminal acts overseas, all the other things, the things that we know is wrong with the world. And obviously instead we see him, sailing around with Richard Branson and pinning Netflix deals and living a life that is largely congruent with how he held himself out as president of the United States.
Well, some of that stuff is good. Like Tiger King, I enjoyed highly the documentary that he made.
Barack Obama's fingerprints are on Tiger King.
Yeah, that was him. He did the entire tiger because it's not a lot of people know this, but tigers and private tiger ownership has been one of kind of his pet issues for a while. Back from since he was teaching at Harvard, and also I believe he did the story about the chess woman.
Okay,
Oh.
Queen of Katwe.
I didn't know
No,
that.
you mean the one with the wide-eyed lady?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I don't know. I can't double check this right now, but
All right.
I'm pretty sure that's what he's been doing for the past 4 years instead of like becoming a radical leading the resistance.
But the point is, when he did have this moment of, courage, I don't know what you want to call it, of principle, it makes it that much more difficult to understand. And I just wondered if you had any insight or any theories about why this thing was the thing he chose to show some backbone on.
I want to think that it's just, the letters that we wrote and, and the desperation I was in at the time, because I was fighting to get, I was fighting for access to a very personal thing, which is like I was fighting because I was transitioned in prison, and I had the ACLU to fight for me on this, and I needed to get access to surgery, and like pretty desperately, and I finally got that done in 2018, so that's over and done with. But it was something very personal and very hard and very frustrating and very difficult, and it was just like the like personal desperation that we were in, and the fact that Obama is a man of compromise, right? Throughout his entire history, he's been like a figure of compromise and both sides, and we played to that, right? We were just like, we're not asking you to say, I know that like all the activists were like, pardon, hero, and all this stuff. We're just like, I'm just tired. I just want to go home, and I just want to like be given the opportunity to like live the rest of my life, and like that. I think that just like appeals to him, like the sort of like compromise of that. We're just like, we're not asking you to weigh into all that other stuff. We're just like, please just give me a chance to like get out of here in 3 years. And again, like our official ask was 10 years. So,
right. Well, 10 years also would have been a compromise. And so him kind of undercutting that, I mean, doing even better, one-upping you, as it were, is notable. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we asked for 10, like officially we asked for 10, and like the activists, they put up time served, and there was a White House petition, and I am 100% convinced that, with a single sweep of the pen, he literally saved my life.
I will say that from that period, the Obama lame duck period, that the news of your commutation was the only memorable good news from that era, particularly as the liberal establishment was at the start of their Russiagate paranoia and at the very beginning of their obsession with the FBI, with the CIA, and with the national security state. And there's another interesting piece of information that's relevant from that period. Do you remember the stories from December 2020 when I believe it was Samantha Power at the UN? There was a resolution, I believe, to condemn the building of Israel's building of settlements in the West Bank, and the U.S., which normally blocks resolutions like that, abstained from it. And I'm not really sure how to read that because, this comes at the very end of
the Trump administration.
Or, well, the Obama administration of 8 years
you said 2020.
I'm sorry, I meant 2016.
Okay, 2016. Yeah. Okay, so the abstention. Yeah, the abstention is very different.
Yeah, and this comes after 8 years of the entirely opposite policy from the Obama administration. So I'm not sure how to read that either.
Yeah, a more cynical person than me might just say that, it's like these are legacy defining moments and you need to you only have 60 to 90 days to change how you get remembered and portrayed by history. I want to not think that that's the case for me. But I think a more cynical person than me might make that connection. Then again, I'm not saying that personally, but I do, and I also think that that there was a lot of eggs put into the third sort of the third Democratic term in a row bucket. There were a lot of liberals who just and I don't know, I don't understand. I remember this time period very vividly, and I was just like, how can you not think that Trump's not going to win somehow? I knew this by early 2015 because I lived in I was in Kansas. I was in prison and I was in Kansas, and I was around people and I saw the response, and they were just I've never seen people this hyped and energized about a figure in my entire life, right? And this is
such an interesting perspective.
Yeah.
What kind of things were they saying? What is your diagnosis of how we got Trump based on that experience?
He speaks to the problem isn't Trump. The problem is the deep-seated, unresolved, demographic, shifting, issues that are real and deep. Trump wasn't an aberration. He was very much the end result of years and years of people who feel they have this imaginary that they convince themselves, and that they're propagandized to think that their entire way of life is about to be utterly destroyed by some ethereal threat, BLM, Antifa, the Democratic elite, name your boogie person, right? Your ethereal enemy, and just and then own the libs. There's just the whole I can tell you there's nothing that got people that gets conservatives more riled up than just crushing a perceived enemy. Nothing. They're just they're just thrilled and satisfied, and they'll just hoot and holler and shout. It's like a football game.
But there's been enemies there's at least been this kind of partisan duopoly for a long time, right? And it's not
but it's intensifying, and the polarization is just going up and up and up and up.
So, you described yourself a little bit ago as not being a more cynical person. And I've heard you talk about hope and, finding that wellspring within yourself. And it's interesting, given the trauma, frankly, that you've experienced, that you don't describe yourself as a more cynical person, especially while the left is seemingly marinating in a deep, dark cynicism, especially after the end of Bernie's campaign.
Yeah.
And, I'm curious how you're feeling about our broader politics as someone who has spoken about how important issues like Medicare for all are, not just more broadly in terms of having health insurance, but for trans people in particular who would be able to transition and have that paid for, and on and on and on. How are you managing to not be cynical in a world where our ambitions have shrunk so dramatically from a Bernie Sanders campaign framework to a let's set our expectations as high as Joe Biden's head?
Yeah. I think that cynicism is, here's what I think is happening. And I'm going to pull stuff back quite a bit. The end of the 1930s, right? The 1930s were an extremely trying time, in terms of the discourse of the United States, right? Of specifically this part of North America, right? And you had the Great Depression. you had the rise of fascism, you had, and like this is very real. You had the rise of a more radical brand of socialism and even some communism like rising up like out of this, right? So like the center was not holding anymore. FDR comes along and basically does radical policy changes, by the standards of that era, right? Like the New Deal was just gravity defying, for the 1930s, right? And all of that was in the sort of like, as the discourse was becoming more and more polarized and people were becoming more and more intense, right? And the economic and the rate and sort of like the pre-civil rights movement, like with Jim Crow and stuff, was like causing like an enormous amount of conflict to like be boiling up and bubbling up in the 1930s. And all of that gets forgotten because of all the stuff that happened in the 1940s, right? Like Pearl Harbor and the Second World War, like the Pearl Harbor attack and the Second World War became like this galvanizing, unifying energy, this thing that like just was like an epoch defining event, right? And the United States was on the winning side. And was perceived as being internationally, globally, etc., as being like this gigantic, huge, overpowering force, right? And and against this, and then you had the Cold War, where it's like against the Soviet Union. So like again, a unifying, defining principle. And after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, like it kind of evaporated a little bit, and then the War on Terror happened, and it just like had this like, it just started to plant these seeds again of the like increased amount of polarization and the increased amount of like dissent and the increased amount of cynicism within the system, right? And then and now with all of the calamities that are happening on top of each other, and the evidence of things that have been going on for centuries that are now being brought into your face like constantly, like you can't just shy away from it and pretend like it's happening over there anymore, because it's like on your phone and you're being reminded of it and it's being discussed, right? And so all of these different things are sort of like putting people into a position where you are being, and it's happening with everyone. It's not just happening with like leftists and liberals. It's like just any agnostic people. Like you have to sort of like grapple with things and like understand things and like do this while you are under an enormous amount of economic like economic like difficulty, like racial difficulty, like if you're an immigrant, like you have all these other different factors, depending on where you're from and how you've grown up. And so like as you start to like see that there's like this the country is, the United States had this single unifying like thing and this like nationalist identity that that liberals could like latch onto. With that going away, they're just like, it's like these little nuggets of things, while the rest of people who are actually like living every day and like struggling every day are having to grapple with the fact that like that they're either don't have access to things that they've never had before, and now they know that they're never going to get it, or people who have had things for a while and they're losing that, and that's what's happening, and it's like that's what's causing the polarization. And so I think that cynicism is just there. And one of the reasons why I tend to be optimistic on a personal level is because I do think that historically, we have gotten past that and we have gotten through that. But yeah, it's you're gonna have to like you're gonna have to like not implode in yourself, because like the struggle is real, and like the sort of like post-war, post-Second World War era of what I like to think of as like as sort of like a Pax Americana is like over, right? Like it's like now the United States, whenever it says, "Oh, we're bringing freedom and democracy to the world," like people just chuckle and laugh, right? Because it's absurd, right? And this wasn't the case in the 1990s. This wasn't the case in the 1970s. Like people took it seriously, and and not just like domestically, like internationally, and that's been eroded over the last 20 years because it was false to begin with, but like, like and it's not going to come back, right? And that's the thing that I think liberals are going to struggle with a lot, is that you in order for you to have that huge that thing that you can point to, that like nationalist identity that you can point to, that is like strong and is freedom and democracy, right? You have to have an event as large and epoch defining as the Second World War, right? Like you can't, like without that, it's not coming back.
Well, do you think there's other things that a hypothetical left could unify around? Because I heard you talk, for instance, about how you felt a sense of community in prison.
Yeah.
Because of the way that the most conflict you said was with prison guards, and you would have to band together and share resources when, for instance, certain basic kind of, I don't know if you call them commissary items or not, but toothpaste and stuff would sometimes not come through, and so you would stockpile it and share.
Yeah, we were doing mutual aid.
Mutual aid. So, I can see a world where there is a left that's able to unite around a sense of camaraderie, community, solidarity of sorts, and that the precarity that you describe that is felt nearly universally in this country right now because of the failure of our economic system could be a source for that kind of solidarity.
Yeah.
What scares me is that the left party doesn't seem to be particularly interested in picking up the substantive kind of policies that excite people along those lines and would help to define them as a party that's invested in those things, and to help spark that sense of community through these universal programs, because they're being fed by the same corporate beast as the right-wing party.
They're not. Well, it's because they're not the left. I mean, they're the center-right, and, like the controlled opposite. So the sort of like control, like, and it's become cliche, right? But like, I do kind of mean it like, in a sort of like, like the controlled opposition kind of way. Like, the Democratic, like the party that is to the left, that is to the left of the Republican Party, which is now openly fascist, right? You have like an openly fascist party versus like a like crypto fascist sort of like, you look at the Biden campaign and look at how reactionary the language is, right? Like if you look, like Build Back Better is just a happy-go-lucky, reactionary, like, it's just like somebody like went to like Google Translate, took Make America Great Again, put it into like a couple different languages, and then translated it back, and you get Build Back Better. Like it's like a regurgitation of it, but like with like a slightly different, it's just teams. Like I keep thinking of like the American electoral political discourse has just become the NFL. Like it's just like I'm a diehard Patriots fan, and you're not, like
most certainly am not a Patriots fan.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, a few moments ago, Chelsea, you mentioned that if we were to say America's going to go fight somewhere to save democracy or something, we would all chuckle. And that you don't think we're going to go back to having those blinders on. You're a big part of that story. You're a big part of helping people to realize the depth of American malfeasance globally, and to really be able to put a fine point on it in a way. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I wonder if you anticipated that, or what was going through your mind as you were sitting at work and making the choice to sneak out information on the now famous Lady Gaga CD. Right.
It wasn't immediate. I can tell you that. So like the leaks didn't just happen. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, like I'm just going to like do this thing, right? It was like a months long process, and it actually didn't take up that much time in terms of like my work life, right? It was like 3 minutes to like start doing it, like type some up here and like get this to go going. Like it was like a side project, right? One thing I will say is that a lot of people like they like to focus on this notion of like war crimes, right? Like I often get introduced, and like, people are like, oh, Chelsea Manning, she revealed war crimes, right? And I always have like a little bit of like a like discomfort with that, and that comes with the understanding that like whenever I think, as somebody who's like trained in this stuff and like really understands this stuff, like the LOAC, the law of armed conflict, right, is like another post-war World War II invention, right? The laws of armed conflict, right, are extremely interpretive, right? And so what gets called, what people colloquially understand as like being a war crime is like there's like legal definitions for these things. There's very specific things, right? And so like an atrocity can happen, a horrifying atrocity can happen, and it still be 100% within the confines of what is very flexibly allowed and what is very flexibly interpreted under the laws of armed conflict, right? So like something could be an atrocity and not be considered, according to the laws of armed conflict, a war crime. And so I always have this discomfort with like the terminology of war crime personally, because like it reinforces the idea that there is an existing system, the laws of armed conflict, and these like international conventions, like the Geneva Conventions, that are interpreted by the incumbent powers, the incumbent international powers, who have an interest in ensuring that, like the losers and the people we don't like, they are interpreted very harshly by this, but we give ourselves some passes, right? So like it's just like it like I just think of like of this stuff as like these are atrocities, like these are bad, these are like horrifying things. And also like there's the diplomatic aspect, right? Like I can't get into, it's actually a crime for me to discuss the contents of the leaks because it's still classified, but the general gist of what you get out of like the cables and like the content of like the diplomacy stuff is like how the machinations work, how the horse trades are made, how these things are dealt, like how you end up in a situation like the Iraq War, right? Because like these are not isolated. Like we've been taught like that, since middle school, that like history is over. These are discrete events. They're not connected to each other. They're not tied to each other, and these just show like how absolutely intertwined and interwoven all of this stuff is. Like what does something that's happening in Iraq have to do with what's happening in Haiti like 2 years earlier? And you can see for yourself.
Some of the recent conversation about the Biden administration has been about comparing him to FDR, saying this is not Obama 2.0, this is not triangulation, this is an actual new ideology, it's a new path forward. And on issues of war and diplomacy and national security, I find that there's I don't know how to put this. I've not heard people make the argument that Biden, who was the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for a long, long time, that he represents, by the Iraq War supporter, that he represents a new path. How would you characterize his announcement that we're withdrawing from Afghanistan by 9/11?
Here's how I characterize it. These are policy decisions that are being made from the perspective of a government that, at a policy perspective, understands what's happening right across the country, right? Politically, it's absurd. It's absurd to be like, oh, this is different. This is anything different. No, it's just more of the same. But I do think that there is more of an understanding within the policy side of this government, and like the bureaucratic side, that recruitment numbers for the military have just plummeted, right? Nobody's joining, nobody's enlisting in the military. The military and as technologically advanced as the military is, like if you can't fill in like slots where people are sitting, then you just have junk. Like you have expensive junk everywhere.
Well, know what? The unemployment is too high, and people would rather sit at home and collect unemployment than die in a resource war.
Right, exactly. And, there's more and more of an understanding, I think, from a policy perspective, the dire crisis that is facing the legitimacy and and for the first time in our lives, like the last couple years have shown that like the United States has a question mark at the end of it. Like And and they understand this fundamentally, and they have to figure out from their perspective how to do that, and do that within a political framework that where there is this left-right divide, where there is this sort of like question mark from the openly fascist right about the existence of or legitimacy of the democratic institutions that, the supposedly democratic institutions that have existed for, however long you want to, like, wherever you want to have the delineation of where these things have existed. Like the legitimacy of the system is like in question, and they know this. And so one of the reasons why you see like the pullout from Afghanistan is like, oh, we don't have the ability or the legitimacy to conduct this stuff anymore. We can't fill in the boots on the ground anymore. We can't fill in these slots and still be able to put down whatever happens domestically, right? Because like we're like the United States is, I think, from a policy perspective, not necessarily becoming isolationist, but is becoming more inwardly focused from even from a foreign policy perspective, out of necessity.
The necessity being, you mean uprisings like Black Lives Matter? Or do you mean something else?
Whatever is coming. Like I just, like you can't have, like the economic situation and strife of this of where we are. The inequality that we're facing is so extreme and so like, if you just looked at it, if I were looking at this as like a completely neutral, if I was looking at the demographics of nation state A, right, and I just copied and pasted the economics like situation and the like political situation in the United States, and I just pasted it in there in like a double blind study without knowing what's going on, I would come to the conclusion that there was about to be a civil conflict, that it was about to be a major civil conflict in this nation, right? And that's where we are, right? We're like, it's alarming, and I think that the government understands this. And yes, it could be, from their perspective, it's Black Lives Matter. It is people who show up to
Antifa.
Antifa, or anti-fascist stuff, or people who are pro-Palestine, and now after 1/6 they're realizing, oh, actually, like we have to worry about the fascists too, because like they're not, like they've turned on the security establishment. Who could see that coming?
Isn't that Joe Biden's pitch? Hasn't that been the justification for him since he launched his campaign way back in spring of 2019? That, I'm the guy who's going to keep it together. You've got, everyone to the right of me is an out and out fascist at this point, and then left of me, there's Bernie, and you don't want that. So I can, marshal a majority of the center and, keep things humming along, but with some alterations.
Yeah, I just instead of being like Joe Biden, instead of being FDR during the Great Depression, we've ended up with Calvin Coolidge.